So Gina Carano, one of the stars of the Disney Plus Star Wars show and Boba Fett wannabe The Mandalorian, has recently been called out as transphobic for some things going down on Twitter. But is that actually true? Is she really transphobic? And what happened, and what are the issues at play here? And also, why aren't we just talking about how cute Baby Yoda is? Feels like that would be a conversation that would make everyone just feel better. I'm going to break all of that down right here in this video. So what is going on with Gina Carano? Well, this all got started over something honestly kind of silly and innocuous when it got pointed out that Gina Carano has the phrase beep/boop/beep in her Twitter handle. Basically a mildly innocuous joke making fun of the practice of people putting their pronouns like she, her, or he, him, or they, them in their Twitter handle or description. Kind of how like I have it in my Twitter description, as you can see here on screen. So before we go any further, I think it's important to address why people actually do that. I could totally understand why it would seem strange or weird that people put their pronouns in their Twitter handle. Why the hell do people put pronouns in their Twitter handle or in their description? I mean, can't we all tell from your profile picture if you're using she, her, or he, him, or anime avatar pronouns? So for those of you who don't know, I totally understand it being confusing. Let's just bring everyone up to speed. Sharing pronouns is a practice that has started to evolve over the past decade or so that has mainly become more and more prevalent out of a desire to accommodate the transgender community. Basically, upon meeting someone, we generally look at them and take visual cues to determine what someone's gender is. Do they have breasts? Are they wearing makeup? Do they have a dress on? Well, if we see all those things, we assume that that person is a girl and start using female pronouns. The same goes for guys. We assume someone that wears a tie or has facial hair or looks like Chris Hemsworth is a guy and start using male pronouns. Now, pretty much all of us do all of that stuff unconsciously. Whenever we look at someone, we don't actively think about all these things, but we do it literally every single time that we meet someone. From when you say hi to your Starbucks server, to watching characters on TV, or when you spend hours of the day looking at Chris Hemsworth. Sorry, I just rewatched Thor. Half-naked Chris Hemsworth is kind of stuck up in my brain right now. I'm fine, let's move on. But anyways, the main issue with all of this though is that many trans people, especially trans people who are either pre-transition or don't want to transition, but not exclusively them, often don't visually look like when we think of certain genders in today's society. I mean, look at me for example. I get many people in my videos comments who may have just stumbled upon one of my videos or have only seen a few of my videos who are actively confused because I personally have both feminine features like, longer hair, makeup, breasts, and the clothes I wear, but also I have some more typically masculine features as well, like the more angular facial features of my face and also my slightly deeper voice than most other women. And as a result of stuff like this sort of mishmashing of typically seen as feminine and typically seen as masculine features, myself and other trans people sometimes have others assume the wrong pronouns when interacting with us. They'll look at someone and sort of not be entirely sure, so they'll just pick one that they think most fits and start using he, him, or she, her pronouns, which may actually be wrong for the person that they're applying it to. For example, while I identify as a woman, if I go into a Starbucks or things like that, some people will say hello sir or he, hims without even thinking about it. They don't mean anything bad by it. They just sort of saw me, were maybe confused for a second, made a quick assumption, and started using pronouns that they thought most fit instead of actually asking me what my pronouns are. And when this happens, it's often not a big deal, especially if it's done accidentally like the scenario I just described, which is most of the time. Most of the time, it's just accidental or innocuous or someone just trying to avoid having a longer conversation. But it can be annoying for some, like myself. Like when I go into Starbucks, that sort of stuff, it's annoying, it's bothersome, it throws me out, it makes me feel like I'm not really being seen by the other person. Like, oh, they don't really see the person that I want them to see, or they don't recognize me or don't see me. But it's not a sign of active hate or disrespect, but it is just a thing that happens. But for many others, especially those who are early in their coming out as a trans person, or maybe in situations where someone is often deliberately trying to make them feel bad for being transgender and may misgender them by using the wrong pronouns to do so, when people screw up pronouns around them, it can be deeply distressing. When you hear someone make a mistake with your pronouns when you're early in transition, someone mistaking your pronouns makes you feel upset and like, oh gosh, I'm not looking the way I want to, I'm not looking good. It puts you up in your head. And if someone's actively misgendering you, or you're in a situation where your family doesn't accept you, having someone misuse pronouns around you can make you feel like, oh, this person's angry at me too. It sort of triggers in your mind that sort of response that you've been sort of associating with people misgendering you, whether that's the intention of the person misgendering you or not. But again, most pronoun mistakes are accidental because we all just make assumptions on someone's gender subconsciously when we meet them. And I mean, everyone does this. Even I do this as a trans person. I still sometimes look at people and make assumptions of their gender and sometimes get it wrong. I do this all the time, and it's something that I actively have to try and get over. But it's something that I am trying to get over, but it's something I've been ingrained with since I was a kid. But again, everyone, including trans people, does make the assumption. So I'm not here to hate on anybody for misreading pronouns, and most trans people understand this. Most trans people, in fact, I would say pretty much all of us, when we are misgendered by the wrong pronouns accidentally, we'll just mostly politely correct or ignore the mistake. So I know that this is a really long sidetrack, but I promise all of this will come back to Gina Carano at some point. But continuing on though, sharing pronouns, the idea of sharing pronouns is a practice meant to avoid these social faux pas or issues. Basically, when you meet someone, along with sharing your name, you just say your pronouns too. I would just say, hi, I'm Jessie, she, her pronouns. That's literally all you do. It lets you know all the information about me and ensures that there's going to be no mistakes in our conversations. Or if there are mistakes, it's something that you'll be aware of and maybe can kind of help fix yourself. I've had people do that. I've said I use she, her pronouns. People make the mistake and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And we just move on and it's all okay. And I should say that while this practice has evolved to help trans people feel more comfortable, it does benefit cis people, i.e. non-transgender people. Cis is a term that means non-transgender as well. I think a good example of this is comedian Tig Notaro, who many people may know as Jet Reno on Star Trek Discovery, who is a cisgender, again, non-transgender woman. But she does have more masculine-looking features, and she's often spoke about in her comedy and just, in talks about how she sometimes gets mistaken for a man because of her more masculine-looking features. But she is a woman and uses she, her pronouns. So pronoun sharing helps trans folks, but it also helps everybody, trans or not. And this practice of pronoun sharing has extended onto Twitter, not just in social spaces when you're meeting trans people. It's just something that people put in their Twitter handles or bios in order to just let people know what their pronouns are in case anyone has any confusion or wants to ask. But I also understand why pronoun sharing is sometimes annoying or feels like it's not necessary, especially for people who may not run into trans people on the regular. I can totally understand that it's an annoying thing to add to your routine. I even forget about it or tend not to do it in some situations. And I understand that it can sometimes feel like that it's the trans community trying to dictate to you something that you have to do, especially for people who, like I said, don't encounter trans people regularly. So why do we even bother doing this slightly annoying thing? Well, as I said, it's just a comfort level thing done in order to make people feel comfortable. I get that it can be annoying and slightly more cumbersome, but if we don't assume someone's name, why do we assume that we know someone's pronouns? I mean, I'm sure you'd get annoyed if I just started speaking to you and calling you David without asking you what your name was. It's just a small thing that you can add to your routine that makes it less likely that trans and, as the Tig Notaro example shows, cisgender folks might be misgendered and made to feel uncomfortable, or even worse, being reminded of times where someone deliberately misgendered them, causing them to feel bad. It's just a way to avoid those situations and doing that to someone else. It's just a small thing. And also, it should be mentioned that sharing pronouns in online spaces like Twitter is actually more useful there than in real life. Because typically on Twitter and other social media platforms, the only visual cues one has to assume someone's gender is a profile picture, which may not even be an actual picture of the person that you're interacting with, and maybe someone's Twitter handle or name, which may even not be their real name or their gender. So everything I said about pronoun sharing becomes even more relevant online. Finally, let's circle back to Gina Carano. I told you we'd get there eventually. From what I can tell, Gina Carano, before all of this happened, didn't know anything about pronoun sharing and what I just told you. She didn't understand why pronoun sharing was important to the trans community and can just be a helpful thing to do for trans and cis people alike. And that's totally understandable. I don't assume that every single person should know automatically about every single thing about how we can make trans people feel more comfortable. It's all about learning, and we're learning together. I didn't come birthed out of the womb knowing everything about the trans community just because I happen to be trans. And maybe Gina Carano did know these things and maybe she didn't, but I'm going to assume best possible intent here based off what she's actually saying and take that as true just for the purposes of our discussion because I want to be the most generous to her in her position. So, without knowing anything, Gina looked around on Twitter and saw many other people sharing their pronouns and thought, hey, that's a bit weird and kind of funny. So she decided to put on her profile that beep boop beep joke. Honestly, it's really an innocuous thing that I'm sure could be worth a mild chuckle if you don't understand what pronoun sharing is. I totally get it. Be like, oh yeah, that's mildly funny. But as I said, pronoun sharing is something that can be really important to the trans community, helping us feel seen and make us less uncomfortable, and sometimes even more, protect some of us from being accidentally triggered and being reminded of times where we were intentionally misgendered. So some people pointed out to Gina Carano online how that joke could come across as transphobic. And I should be clear, I'm not saying Gina Carano herself for posting that joke was being intentionally transphobic or was transphobic even at all for saying that joke. Again, I think it was just her ignorance leading to a silly, innocuous joke, not hating trans people. But it could come across that way, even unintentionally, especially today where everything gets heightened and where trans issues have been sadly so politicized. Like, for example, pronoun sharing shouldn't be a political issue. It should be just like name sharing. We all have pronouns, we can all share them, it's not a big deal. But sadly, it's become a battleground in our culture war nonetheless because it has to relate to transgender people, and anything relating to transgender people, even in a little way, has to be some heightened, hyperbolic, big thing. So Gina Carano had this pointed out to her on Twitter. And then, as Twitter and social media always does, things got overheightened and blown out of proportion. Basically, once again, we got caught in this social media cycle. Gina does something that can be seen as transphobic, even if that wasn't her intention. It's pointed out to her, then others start assuming that she's actually transphobic, and she gets called out for being transphobic, so she gets understandably offended at being called transphobic because that wasn't her intention to hurt transgender people. So she sees people calling her transphobic as just being mean, so she gets upset and sees all that as bullying of her because people are insulting her for things she did not intend, so she starts pushing back against the people calling her transphobic, so more people start calling her transphobic because they see her defense of these things as her trying to defend some transphobic joke and actually hating on transgender people, and then things get angrier and more hyperbolic aimed at Gina Carano because the louder you shout and the more heightened you say it, the more the algorithm rewards you. Then Gina Carano gets more upset at those more heightened things being said at her, and you just see how this cycle just keeps going and keeps feeding itself and keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until everyone wants to cancel Gina Carano, and Gina Carano hates everyone else who's trying to talk to her in some sort of semblance of a way about why her joke was a problem. And in the end, Gina Carano put up this tweet. Beep Boop Bob has zero to do with mocking trans people, heart, and 100% to do with exposing the bullying mentality of the mob that has taken over the voices of many genuine causes. I want people to know you can take hate with a smile, so boop you for misunderstanding. Hashtag all love, no hate. So basically, Gina has decided to stand on the hill of her leaving the beep boop beep thing in her profile. It's the dumbest of things to build a hill to die on, but it's all become emblematic of this heightened thing for her and for all of us. And she's dying on this hill not because she wants to hurt trans people, but because she doesn't want to give in to the over-the-top hyperbolic things being said about her on Twitter. And like I said, I get it. She's feeling attacked because Twitter is an awful place sometimes that can over-hyperbolicize everything and heighten everything to the nth degree. And I mean, we've talked about this numerous times before in my videos on J.K. Rowling and William Shatner and many others. Twitter creates these hyperbolic wars and allows the person on the end of the criticism to feel ganged up on because so many people are coming at her and she's just one person, and then she can cherry pick the worst responses out of all of that and feel bullied. And she's not wrong. There are some people who are saying some really over-the-top stuff about a really dumb joke, and that isn't necessary and isn't warranted. But because those people exist, this allows Gina Carano to feel righteous in her cause, allowing her to dig into a position rather than listening to what honest criticism that there actually is about that joke. And the problem is, there are people who want to have that good faith discussion. And it's clear that Gina Carano can have that good faith discussion. She states actually in another tweet that she spoke with one of her coworkers from The Mandalorian, Pedro Pascal, who does understand pronoun sharing. And she learned from him why it's important to share pronouns. Yes, Pedro and I spoke, and he helped me understand why people were putting them in their bios. I didn't know before, but now I do. I won't be putting them in my bio, but good for all of you who choose to. I stand against bullying, especially the most vulnerable, and freedom to choose, 100%. But for Gina, it's not really about pronoun sharing anymore. No, now it's about not giving in to Twitter bullies. And it's frustrating because she knows that it can come across as hurtful to many in the trans community, being belittling of how often we are made fun of for simply asking for small accommodations like asking for pronouns that not only would make us feel more welcome, but also actually allow for everyone to be less likely to screw out pronouns of anyone, trans or not. And she chooses to stand on this hill not because she actively wants to hurt trans people, but now it's become a point of honor between her and those folks who took things too far. Again, as I said in my discussions with William Shatner, there are some who are more interested in winning an argument and seeming right over actually listening empathetically and trying to have a conversation. It's annoying because there are so many more voices out here trying to have good-natured conversation, but due to human nature and social media compounding together, we all only see the hyperbolic, heightened things that are encouraged because social media loves hyperbolic, over-the-top statements, and it just pushes people into their own camps rather than engendering empathy. And I'm not trying to tone police here. I do understand why people are upset at Gina, especially right now after she's dug in her heels at something that seems like it's offensive to the trans community. I understand, especially if you've been actively hurt and insulted in real life by people who have deliberately been misgendering in similar ways as this joke. I honestly have been insulted the same exact way, and seeing Gina joke about it honestly annoyed me too, and I understand why it could lead one to assume Gina holds similar views to those who are deliberately targeting and harassing trans people, because she's signaling the same thing here. But as I always say, I try to assume the best possible intent, but I get when people are upset. But all that gets heightened and distorted in the most hyperbolic and least helpful ways on Twitter because it's a platform that doesn't encourage lower stakes, nuanced, and longer discussions. So in the end, I get why Gina Carano is being pushed into keeping the dumb beep boop bop whatever joke. To back down would feel like she's giving it to people who are over the top. But while I get it, what it actually seems to showcase, whether her intention or not, and I don't think she intends it, but it sends the message that she does not care about trans people. Sometimes we need to swallow our pride in order to showcase our empathy, instead of our willingness to win a fight with people who won't even acknowledge if someone won or lost anyways. And that's the most important thing here. I get her anger, but there are more important things going on. While I've been as generous to her situation as I can be, the truth is, transgender people are being insulted, harassed, and hurt all the time in even worse ways than this. And yes, Gina may have been facing some harassment over this dumb joke, some of it completely over the top. But to double down on the joke just pushes trans fans and allies away. And I'll be honest, this kind of stuff makes me less excited to want to watch the next season of The Mandalorian, and that sucks. But even worse, and even more importantly, it signals to those who do harass trans people intentionally that it's okay to do so. Because someone with a platform like Gina Carano is standing by them, whether that's her intention or not. That's how it looks to many on the outside. So yeah, it may feel righteous for her to not take down some joke, but Gina Carano is ultimately emboldening harmful transphobia, and it doesn't help anyone in the end. Alright, that's my video on this. I should say I do know there are a couple of things I didn't talk about in this video, such as, for example, Gina Carano's other tweets on issues like Black Lives Matter, protesting, and other political issues. But while I do have many opinions on that, I wanted to have this video focus mainly on the issue at hand and try to frame everything in a way that would allow everyone the best chance to learn and grow without getting into other areas that would muddy the waters and get contentious in other ways. Again, that's not to say I don't have many other thoughts on what Gina Carano has tweeted in other areas and other stuff, but in order for this video to be effective in the way I want it to be, as a way to educate about the trans community and trans issues, I just wanted to keep this discussion on this one topic. But I totally welcome criticism if you disagree on that, and I'll definitely take that into account if I do more videos on this subject or similar subjects in the future. So if you want to offer that criticism, or you have other thoughts about Gina Carano or this situation, or you just have questions, please let me know down in the comments below. I honestly would love to actually engender that nuanced, deep, thoughtful discussion, because I think that we're all adults here and can have that. Beyond commenting though, don't forget you can subscribe to this channel where I do more discussions on issues that face the trans community, the LGBTQ community, as well as pop culture, geeky nerd stuff as well. Believe me, I do more than just describe Twitter battles, which is kind of what my channel's becoming, but you know what, that's fine. I enjoy doing this stuff. I enjoy doing the breakdowns. That's on this channel, so please give a subscribe if you want more of any of that stuff. I also do some podcasts, one called What the Frel, one called Star Trek Behind the Lines, that are a ton of fun. You can also help me over on Patreon to help me do these videos and help me get more equipment and things like that. It really means a lot. But beyond all of that, whether you subscribe, whether you comment, whether you help on Patreon, I'm just glad that you stopped by and hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Stephen Clinard, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Jemshin, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, Wellington Marcus, John Steele, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Jason Knott, Maeve, Subraxis, Tonya Trummer, Wen Dizzlebizzle, Gretchen Badger, Dante St. James, Polly Mina, Piston Twisted Garage, and Bree Beecher. Thank you all so much for your continued support.